Sam Peckinpah's legendary 1969 Western wasn't just revolutionary for its blood-soaked violence, it was a production filled with bizarre behind-the-scenes chaos, from a crew member assigned to club another crew member with a stick to a director who hired prostitutes just to brag about it. Between real bullets ending up in prop bandoliers, horses' rear ends being frozen on screen as petty revenge, and a Mexican town being paid to delay electricity installation, the making of this classic was as wild as its title suggests. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Wild Bunch. Fact 1. Crew member armed with club to stop explosion. Movie sets can be dangerous places, but few productions have ever required one crew member to be secretly armed and ready to knock out another crew member to prevent a deadly disaster. During the filming of The Wild Bunch in 1968, this exact scenario played out during one of the most perilous stunts ever attempted in a Western film. The scene in question involved blowing up a railroad bridge while stuntmen on horseback rode across it, a spectacular sequence that required perfect timing between the riders and the explosive charges. Stuntman Joe Knut, a veteran of countless dangerous movie stunts, became increasingly worried about the safety of both the men and horses involved in the stunt. The special effects coordinator, Bud Hulbert, was responsible for detonating the charges at precisely the right moment, but Knut felt that Hulbert wasn't taking the safety concerns seriously enough. When Knut's repeated warnings about the timing fell on deaf ears, he decided to take matters into his own hands in the most unconventional way possible. Without telling director Sam Peckinpah or Hulbert about his plan, Knut quietly approached Gordon Dawson, who was in charge of costumes and wardrobe for the production. Knut gave Dawson very specific and unusual instructions: stand near Hulbert during the stunt while holding a concealed club, and if any of the stuntmen began falling into the water before the final explosive charge was set off, immediately hit Hulbert over the head with the club to knock him unconscious before he could detonate the last explosion. The reasoning behind this extreme measure was simple but terrifying. If the riders fell into the water prematurely and Hulbert still set off the remaining charges, the explosion could easily kill both the men and the horses. Knut knew that knocking out the effects coordinator was the only way to prevent a potential massacre if things went wrong. Fortunately for everyone involved, including Hulbert, who never knew how close he came to being clubbed unconscious, the dangerous stunt went off exactly as planned, and no one was injured during the spectacular bridge explosion sequence. Fact 2. Warner Brothers paid for prostitutes, sort of. Director Sam Peckinpah had a reputation for being wild and unpredictable, but one of his most outrageous decisions during the filming of The Wild Bunch involved hiring local sex workers just so he could tell people that a major Hollywood studio had technically paid for prostitutes for his actors. This bizarre arrangement came to light years later when actor Ben Johnson revealed the truth about one of the film's most memorable scenes. The scene in question involved actors Ben Johnson and Warren Oates, who played the Gorch brothers in the film, enjoying themselves in large wine vats filled with grape juice while being joined by several Mexican women. On the surface, this looked like a typical Hollywood party scene with hired actresses playing local women. But according to Johnson's later interviews, the reality was quite different and much more scandalous. Johnson revealed that the women who appeared in the wine vat scene weren't professional actresses at all, but rather working girls from a nearby brothel in the Mexican town where they were filming. Peckinpah had specifically sought out these women and hired them through the film's official budget, which meant that Warner Brothers Studio was technically paying for their services, even though their role was simply to appear in the movie scene. The director's motivation for this unusual casting choice wasn't artistic, but rather seemed to be purely for his own amusement and bragging rights. Peckinpah apparently took great pleasure in being able to tell people that he had managed to get a major Hollywood studio to pay for prostitutes for his cast members, even though the women were simply acting in a scene rather than providing their usual services. This revelation shows just how far Peckinpah was willing to push boundaries and thumb his nose at studio executives, finding creative ways to shock people and live up to his reputation as one of Hollywood's most rebellious directors. The wine vat scene itself was relatively tame by the film's violent standards, but the story behind its casting reveals the kind of mischievous thinking that made Peckinpah such a controversial figure in Hollywood. Fact 3. Horses' rear ends used as petty revenge. Hollywood egos can lead to some pretty ridiculous feuds, but few directors have ever taken revenge on a complaining actor by literally showing horse backsides during the opening credits. This is exactly what happened when Sam Peckinpah decided to get back at Robert Ryan for constantly griping about his billing in The Wild Bunch creating one of the most childish yet memorable acts of directorial spite in movie history. Robert Ryan was a veteran actor with decades of experience and a significant reputation when he was cast in The Wild Bunch, but he wasn't happy about his position in the credits. Ryan felt that his status and experience entitled him to top billing alongside William Holden and Ernest Borgnine, and he made his displeasure known repeatedly throughout the production. His constant complaints about not receiving what he considered proper recognition quickly got on Peckinpah's nerves, and the director decided to teach the actor a lesson in the most humiliating way possible. When it came time to create the opening credit sequence, Peckinpah made sure to give William Holden and Ernest Borgnine the respectful treatment that Ryan had been demanding for himself. As their names appeared on screen, the director froze the film on dramatic close-up shots of their faces, giving each actor a moment of dignified screen time that highlighted their importance to the movie. However, when Robert Ryan's name came up in the credits, Peckinpah had prepared a very different kind of tribute. Instead of a flattering close-up or heroic shot, the director chose to freeze the screen on several horses' rear ends, literally making Ryan's credit appear over the backsides of the animals. The contrast between the respectful treatment given to the other lead actors and the deliberately insulting imagery chosen for Ryan made Peckinpah's message crystal clear. This petty act of revenge was Peckinpah's way of telling Ryan exactly what he thought of his complaints about billing, and it remains visible to anyone who watches the film's opening credits today, serving as a permanent reminder of one director's creative approach to settling disputes with difficult actors. Fact 4. Record-breaking 643 editorial cuts. The Wild Bunch holds a technical record that might surprise modern moviegoers who are used to rapid-fire editing in today's action films, but back in 1969, the sheer number of cuts in this Western was absolutely revolutionary and unlike anything audiences had ever experienced. Editor Lou Lombardo worked with Sam Peckinpah to create a film that contained 3,643 individual shot-to-shot edits, which was more than any other Technicolor film that had ever been processed up to that point in cinema history. To understand just how groundbreaking this was, it helps to know that most movies from that era used far fewer cuts and relied on longer, more traditional shots that let scenes play out without constant interruption. Peckinpah and Lombardo were pioneering a completely new style of filmmaking that used quick cuts and rapid editing to create a sense of chaos and intensity, particularly during the film's violent action sequences. What made this editing technique even more unusual was that many of these cuts were so brief that they operated almost below the level of conscious perception. Some of the individual shots lasted only 3 or 4 frames, which means they appeared on screen for just a fraction of a second before cutting to the next image. These nearly subliminal cuts were so fast that the naked eye could barely register them as separate shots, yet they contributed to an overall feeling of frantic energy and violence that made viewers feel like they were caught in the middle of the action. This innovative editing style was particularly evident during the film's famous shootout sequences, where Peckinpah used multiple cameras running at different speeds to capture the same action from various angles. The editors then wove together all of this footage using their record-breaking number of cuts, creating a visual experience that felt more like being in an actual gunfight than watching a traditional movie. The technique was so influential that it changed how action scenes were filmed and edited for decades to come. Fact 5. Town paid to delay electricity installation. Sometimes the biggest challenges in making a period movie come from the march of modern progress, and the Wild Bunch faced exactly this problem when the filmmakers discovered that their perfect location was about to be ruined by the arrival of 20th century technology. The producers ended up paying an entire Mexican town to literally hold back time and delay their entry into the modern electrical age just to preserve the authentic look of 1913. The town in question was Parras de la Fuente, located in northern Mexico, which had been chosen as a primary filming location because it still looked remarkably similar to how a frontier town would have appeared during the film's time period. The old buildings, dusty streets, and rural atmosphere provided exactly the kind of authentic backdrop that director Sam Peckinpah needed to tell his story about aging outlaws in a changing world. However, the production team discovered they had arrived at a critical moment in the town's history. Local officials were on the verge of modernizing Parras de la Fuente by installing electrical power lines throughout the community, a development that would have completely destroyed the period authenticity that made the location so valuable for the film. Power lines and electrical poles stretching across the town would have made it impossible to create convincing shots that looked like they belonged in the early 1900s. Faced with the potential loss of their perfect location, Peckinpah's producers came up with an unusual solution that required some creative financial negotiations with the town's leadership. They offered to pay the community an undisclosed sum of money in exchange for postponing their electrical installation project for 6 months, which would give the film crew enough time to complete all of their shooting in the area. The town officials agreed to this arrangement, essentially allowing a Hollywood production to pay them to remain in the past a little bit longer. This meant that for half a year, the residents of Paras de la Fuente continued living without modern electrical conveniences so that their community could serve as the backdrop for one of cinema's most influential westerns. Fact 6. 350 uniforms for 6-0 men. Creating a convincing war movie requires hundreds of extras dressed as soldiers, but wardrobe supervisor Gordon Dawson faced an almost impossible mathematical challenge during the filming of The Wild Bunch, when he had to make 350 Mexican military uniforms somehow clothe approximately 6,000 different men throughout the production. This logistical nightmare was made even worse by the film's incredibly violent content, which meant that the costumes were being destroyed almost as quickly as they could be repaired. The problem stemmed from the nature of Sam Peckinpah's filmmaking style, which required massive battle sequences, with hundreds of extras playing Mexican soldiers who were constantly being shot, blown up, or otherwise killed in spectacular fashion during the film's many action scenes. Every time a soldier was hit by gunfire or caught in an explosion during filming, his uniform would be torn, punctured with bullet holes, or completely soaked with fake blood, making it unusable for the next scene without extensive cleaning and repair work. Dawson and his wardrobe team quickly realized that they were fighting a losing battle against the sheer volume of costume damage that was being created with each day of filming. The uniforms couldn't simply be thrown away after each violent scene because the production budget didn't allow for thousands of replacement costumes. So instead, the wardrobe department had to work around the clock to clean off fake blood, sew up bullet holes, and patch together torn fabric so that the same uniforms could be used over and over again. This meant that the same 350 uniforms were being recycled constantly throughout the production, with some individual costumes being worn by dozens of different extras as filming progressed. The wardrobe team became expert at rapid repairs and cleaning, working through the night to have damaged uniforms ready for the next day's shooting, essentially performing costume miracles to keep up with Peckinpah's demanding schedule and his appetite for destruction. The mathematical impossibility of the situation shows just how resourceful movie crews had to be when working with limited budgets on ambitious productions. Fact 7. Ernest Borgnine discovered real bullets in props. Movie sets are supposed to be safe places where actors can pretend to be in danger without actually risking their lives, but Ernest Borgnine discovered a potentially deadly safety violation on The Wild Bunch that could have turned the film's fake violence into a real tragedy. The veteran actor's military background probably saved lives when he recognized that the prop ammunition being used on set wasn't fake at all, but consisted of actual live bullets that could have seriously injured or killed members of the cast and crew. Borgnine had served as a gunner's mate in the United States Navy during World War II, which gave him extensive experience with real firearms and ammunition that most actors would never have. This military training proved invaluable one morning during filming when he was examining the bandoliers that were part of his costume and noticed something that immediately set off alarm bells in his mind. The bandoliers, which are belt-like straps designed to hold ammunition across a soldier's chest, were supposed to be loaded with harmless prop bullets that would look authentic on camera but pose no danger to anyone on set. However, when Borgnine took a closer look at the ammunition in his bandolier, his trained eye immediately recognized that these weren't prop bullets at all, but real live ammunition that could fire actual projectiles if loaded into a gun. Borgnine immediately stopped filming and confronted the production team about the dangerous mistake, demanding to know why live bullets were being used as props. According to the actor's later account, the filmmakers had apparently made the decision to use real ammunition instead of fake bullets because they wanted to achieve a more authentic sound effect when the bullets moved around in the bandoliers during action scenes. The production team thought that using real bullets would create better audio of ammunition rattling and moving, with one person explaining that they wanted to hear the bullets actually zing during filming. Borgnine's military experience and quick thinking prevented what could have been a serious accident, as live ammunition mixed with the guns and explosive effects being used throughout the production could have created a deadly combination. Fact 8. Albert Decker's mysterious death before release. The Wild Bunch holds the tragic distinction of being the final film appearance for veteran character actor Albert Dekker, who died under extremely unusual and mysterious circumstances more than a year before audiences would ever see his last performance on screen. Dekker's death in May of 1968 shocked Hollywood and created a mystery that remains unsolved to this day, involving bizarre details that made it one of the most talked-about celebrity deaths of the era. Albert Dekker had enjoyed a long and successful career in Hollywood, appearing in memorable films like The Killers and Kiss Me Deadly, and was known for playing tough, often villainous characters. In The Wild Bunch, he played Pat Harrigan, the ruthless railroad detective who hires bounty hunters to track down William Holden's gang of outlaws. Dekker had completed all of his scenes for the film and returned to his Hollywood apartment after finishing work on what would become his final movie role. On May 5, 1968, Dekker's fiancée, fashion model Geraldine Saunders, discovered his body in his locked apartment after he had failed to answer phone calls for 2 days. The scene that police found was deeply disturbing and unlike anything they had encountered before. Dekker was found in his bathroom, apparently the victim of what investigators determined to be accidental death during a dangerous sexual practice known as autoerotic asphyxiation. The details of the discovery made the case even more mysterious and shocking. Dekker's body was found with explicit words and drawings written all over it in red lipstick, and there were signs that money and camera equipment had been taken from the apartment. However, police found no evidence of forced entry or foul play, leading them to rule the death accidental rather than a homicide. The circumstances surrounding Dekker's death were so unusual that they overshadowed his final film performance, and when The Wild Bunch was released in June of 1969, audiences were watching the last work of an actor whose life had ended in one of Hollywood's most bizarre and unexplained tragedies. Fact 9. Lee Marvin chose musical over Western. One of the most interesting what-if scenarios in movie history involves Lee Marvin turning down the lead role in The Wild Bunch to star in a singing and dancing musical instead, a decision that completely changed the course of both films and gave William Holden one of his most memorable career performances. This casting switch happened because Marvin made a purely financial decision that prioritized immediate money over what would become one of the greatest Western films ever made. Lee Marvin was Sam Peckinpah's first choice to play Pike Bishop, the aging outlaw leader who serves as the central character in The Wild Bunch. Marvin had already established himself as a tough guy actor who was perfect for gritty westerns, having appeared in films like Cat Ballou and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. His rugged screen presence and ability to portray morally complex characters made him seem like an ideal fit for Peckinpah's vision of a worn-down gunslinger struggling with the end of the Old West era. Marvin initially accepted the role and was officially cast as Pike Bishop, but before filming could begin, he received a competing offer that completely changed his mind. Paramount Pictures approached him with a significantly larger paycheck to star in Paint Your Wagon, a big-budget musical western that would pair him with Clint Eastwood and feature elaborate song and dance numbers. The financial difference between the two offers was substantial enough that Marvin decided to abandon The Wild Bunch in favor of the more lucrative musical project. This decision left Peckinpah scrambling to find a replacement lead actor, and after considering several other options, he ultimately cast William Holden in the role of Pike Bishop. Holden's performance became one of the defining roles of his later career and helped revitalize his status as a major Hollywood star. Meanwhile, Paint Your Wagon turned out to be a commercial disappointment and is largely forgotten today, while The Wild Bunch became a classic that is still studied and celebrated more than 50 years after its release, making Marvin's choice look particularly unfortunate in retrospect. Fact 10. Same film got worse rating 24 years later. In one of the most unusual situations in movie rating history, The Wild Bunch managed to receive a harsher rating in 1993 than it had originally gotten in 1969, even though the film itself hadn't been changed by even a single frame. This backwards progression in rating standards created a major headache for Warner Brothers when they tried to re-release the classic Western and discovered that what had been acceptable for an R rating decades earlier was now considered too extreme for the same classification. When The Wild Bunch was first submitted to the Motion Picture Association of America in 1969, it received an R rating, which meant that children under 17 needed to be accompanied by an adult to see the film. This was actually quite an achievement at the time, since the movie's graphic violence had initially threatened to earn it the dreaded X rating, which would have severely limited its theatrical distribution and commercial potential. However, when Warner Brothers decided to restore and re-release the film in the 1990s, they followed standard industry practice by resubmitting it to the MPAA ratings board to get an updated rating that reflected current standards. The studio executives expected this to be a routine process, assuming that if anything, the film might receive a milder rating since movie violence had become much more common and accepted in the decades since the original release. Instead, they received a shocking surprise when the ratings board returned The Wild Bunch with an NC-17 rating, which would have meant that no one under 17 could see the film under any circumstances, even with parental supervision. MPAA President Jack Valenti explained that public attitudes toward violence had actually become less tolerant over the years, saying that parents on the ratings board felt the degree and intensity of violence in The Wild Bunch was beyond what children should see. Warner Brothers was forced to appeal this decision and engage in lengthy negotiations with the MPAA to get the film's original R rating restored, ultimately succeeding without having to make any cuts to Peckinpah's vision. Fact 11. Director's son appears in bank robbery scene. Family connections in Hollywood often lead to small cameo appearances, but few directors have ever put their own child in the middle of one of cinema's most violent and chaotic opening sequences like Sam Peckinpah did when he cast his young son Matthew in The Wild Bunch's unforgettable bank robbery scene. This family cameo gives the film a deeply personal touch that most viewers never realize they're witnessing, as the director's own child becomes part of the carnage that sets the tone for the entire movie. The opening bank robbery sequence in The Wild Bunch is one of the most shocking and brutal scenes in Western movie history, featuring a botched heist that turns into a massive shootout between the outlaws and a group of bounty hunters who have set up an ambush in the town. During this chaotic battle, innocent townspeople get caught in the crossfire, and the scene shows the devastating impact of violence on ordinary citizens who just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Among the civilians caught up in this violence are two young children who can be seen huddled together in fear as the gunfight rages around them. These children serve as powerful symbols of innocence being exposed to the brutal realities of the adult world, which was one of the central themes that Peckinpah wanted to explore throughout the film. The image of frightened children witnessing extreme violence creates an emotional impact that makes the audience feel the true cost of the outlaw's criminal lifestyle. What makes this scene even more meaningful is that one of these children, the boy who is holding and protecting the other child during the shootout, is actually Matthew Peckinpah, the director's own son. By putting his own child in this pivotal scene, Sam Peckinpah was making a very personal statement about violence and its effects on the innocent, using his own family to illustrate the themes he wanted the audience to understand about the changing nature of the American West and the price of living by the gun. Fact 12. Yuma prison reference was historically wrong. Even the most carefully researched period films sometimes contain historical errors that slip past the filmmakers, and The Wild Bunch includes one such mistake that involves a famous prison that had actually been closed for years by the time the movie's story takes place. This error occurs during a tense scene where railroad detective Pat Harrigan threatens to send bounty hunter Deke Thornton back to Yuma prison if he fails to capture his former partner Pike Bishop, but the threat was impossible to carry out because the prison in question no longer existed. The Yuma Territorial Prison was a real and notorious institution that operated in Arizona from 1876 until 1909, housing some of the most dangerous criminals in the American Southwest during the height of the frontier era. The prison gained a fearsome reputation for its harsh conditions, brutal heat, and the difficulty of escaping from its remote desert location, making it exactly the kind of place that would strike fear into the heart of any outlaw who was threatened with being sent there. However, by the time The Wild Bunch takes place in 1913, the Yuma Territorial Prison had been closed for 4 full years and had undergone a complete transformation that would have made Harrigan's threat completely meaningless. In 1909, the prison was officially shut down as a correctional facility, and the building was converted into a high school where local students attended classes in the same cells that had once held dangerous criminals. This means that when Harrigan threatens to send Thornton back to Yuma in 1913, he would essentially be threatening to send him back to school rather than prison, which would hardly have been the intimidating prospect that the scene was meant to portray. The screenwriters and filmmakers apparently chose to use the Yuma prison reference because of its legendary reputation in Western folklore, without checking whether the timeline matched up with their story's setting, creating a historical anachronism that sharp-eyed viewers and history buffs have noticed over the years. Fact 13. Multiple actors threatened to beat up Peckinpah. Sam Peckinpah had a well-deserved reputation as one of Hollywood's most difficult and demanding directors, but during the 79-day shoot of The Wild Bunch, his behavior became so abusive and unreasonable that 3 of his lead actors separately threatened him with physical violence if he didn't change his treatment of the cast and crew. This rare situation of multiple stars ganging up against their director shows just how extreme conditions became during the making of this legendary Western. William Holden was the first major actor to reach his breaking point with Peckinpah's conduct on set. Holden had decades of experience working with demanding directors, but he became so disgusted with the way Peckinpah was verbally abusing crew members that he threatened to walk off the production entirely if the director didn't stop his hostile behavior toward the working people who were trying to do their jobs under already difficult conditions in the Mexican desert. Robert Ryan's confrontation with Peckinpah centered around a different but equally frustrating issue, involving the director's complete disregard for his actors' time and personal commitments. Ryan had asked for a few days off from filming so he could campaign for Senator Robert Kennedy, but instead of granting this reasonable request, Peckinpah forced Ryan to spend 10 consecutive days sitting in full costume and makeup without filming a single scene, essentially wasting the actor's time out of pure spite. This treatment pushed Ryan to the point where he threatened to punch Peckinpah if the director didn't start showing some basic respect. Ernest Borgnine's threat was perhaps the most colorful and direct of the 3, as he promised to beat the hell out of Peckinpah if the director didn't give him some relief from the throat-clogging dust that was making it difficult for the actor to breathe during filming in the harsh desert locations. The combination of extreme heat, constant dust, and Peckinpah's demanding perfectionism created working conditions that even experienced Hollywood professionals found nearly unbearable, leading to these unprecedented confrontations between director and stars. Fact 14. Co-creator was the original Marlboro Man. The Wild Bunch has an unexpected connection to one of America's most famous advertising campaigns through Roy Sickner, the man who originally came up with the idea for the movie and who had previously achieved fame as the very first Marlboro Man to appear in television commercials for the cigarette company. This connection between a tough guy advertising icon and a groundbreaking Western film shows how Hollywood careers could take surprising turns during the 1960s. Roy Sickner's journey from advertising model to movie creator began when he was chosen to represent the rugged, masculine image that Marlboro wanted to project in their television commercials during the early days of the campaign that would eventually become one of the most successful advertising efforts in history. The Marlboro Man campaign was designed to transform the brand from a cigarette that had been marketed primarily to women into something that appealed to tough, outdoorsy men, and Sickner's appearance and demeanor made him the perfect choice to embody this new image. However, Sickner's interests extended far beyond modeling and advertising work, as he was also involved in the movie industry as a stuntman and had experience working on various film productions. His background in both advertising and Hollywood stunt work gave him a unique perspective on storytelling and action sequences, which eventually led him to develop the original concept that would become the Wild Bunch. When Sickner brought his idea for an aging outlaw gang to the attention of screenwriter Wallen Green and director Sam Peckinpah, his vision became the foundation for what would become one of cinema's most influential Western films. Sickner didn't just contribute the initial concept and then disappear from the project, but remained involved throughout the production process, working as the second unit director and helping to coordinate some of the film's most dangerous and spectacular action sequences. His dual background as both the original Marlboro Man and a key creative force behind the Wild Bunch represents a fascinating intersection between American advertising culture and the movie industry during a pivotal period in both fields. Fact 15. Studio cut 10 minutes without director's knowledge. One of the most heartbreaking betrayals in movie history occurred when Warner Brothers executives secretly butchered the Wild Bunch behind Sam Peckinpah's back, removing 10 crucial minutes from his carefully crafted film and doing such a sloppy job that they turned a masterpiece into a confusing mess that audiences couldn't fully understand. This corporate sabotage happened because studio executives panicked over disappointing box office numbers and decided to sacrifice artistic integrity for the possibility of squeezing in a few extra screenings each day. When The Wild Bunch first opened in theaters in June of 1969, it received mixed reviews and failed to immediately connect with mainstream audiences who were unprepared for its graphic violence and complex moral themes. Warner Brothers executives, who were primarily concerned with financial returns rather than artistic achievement, became nervous about the film's commercial prospects and decided that something needed to be done to improve its box office performance. The studio's solution was based on a simple but flawed piece of mathematical reasoning. If they could make the movie shorter, theaters would be able to show it more times each day, which would theoretically lead to increased ticket sales and higher profits. To implement this plan, the executives approached producer Phil Feldman and instructed him to cut 10 minutes from the film's running time, but they specifically told him not to inform Peckinpah about these changes. Feldman carried out these orders, but his editing work was rushed and careless, removing scenes that were essential to the film's narrative structure and character development. The cuts were made without any regard for how they would affect the story's flow or the audience's ability to understand the relationships between characters, particularly the complex history between Pike Bishop and Deke Thornton that gave the film much of its emotional depth. The result was a shortened version that left many viewers confused about character motivations and plot developments, effectively destroying much of what made Peckinpah's vision so powerful, and turning a brilliant film into something that seemed choppy and incomplete to audiences who saw this butchered version.